good whatever you might be experiencing right now. Welcome back to another episode of Back for Your Future. I can't even say it. Back for Your Future, the show that goes back to help you think about your future. Yeah. That's what we say anyway. Hi, I'm your host, Drew Hall. With me today is the man, the myth, the legend, Tony Nick Nijadi.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, man. It's awesome.
Welcome back. Yeah, so on today's show, we got lots of fun stuff to talk about. We're calling this episode 3 Men and Some Ice Cream Cones. And it'll all make sense as we go through the show.
I hope so.
To set it up, yeah, I hope so too. Just to tee it up, thank you again if you've been listening to the show regularly or if this is your first time. After the show, maybe give us some love on your favorite podcast network. I did hear recently, doesn't affect us at all, but just FYI, if you're listening on Google Podcasts, Google is abandoning their podcast. So you're going to have to find us on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple, plus some others. I think we're on iHeart and some other ones. Yeah. But those are the big 3. If you check us out on YouTube, you can see our glorious faces, or also on Spotify, you can see our glorious faces. In Apple, you can just listen in your car or your ride to work. But we would love if you would just drop us a very pleasant or non-pleasant. We don't even care. They say in the business, all news is, or all talk is good talk. So we want you to talk about it one way or the other. All right, so I'm going to set up the show, and then I'm going to let Tony do his magic with it. The year is 1993. It's a pretty pivotal year for us. We've been teeing this up for the past few episodes. This is, we're stepping into when our friendship and dynamic really started to explode, especially into the film world. There's a lot of big moments that happened this year that go on to shape our careers, our lives, our friendship, and pretty much everything else. So big year for us. Tony, what do we got?
I mean, 1993 is a huge year for this podcast and for this show because it's just, to me, it's probably one of the most glorious years of film and soundtracks and music just in general. I mean, especially in my lifetime. And I mean, that's so 1993. It's just such a glorious year, and it's probably a top 3 for me in my lifetime. And as far as, like, if I could take a time machine and go back to one of the years, the 47 years of my life, I would probably go back to 1993 and relive that entire year for sure. I mean, a lot of stuff happening, lots of great stories. We're going to see tons of great movies together. We're going to listen to lots of great music. And to me, we do it together, so it's kind of an awesome thing. And then... So just kick back and pop your favorite beverage and listen to the next probably 10 episodes, all dealing with 1993. And I think you're going to have a glorious time listening to us talk about it. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, if you can't tell, he's hyped. It's fun because there's just a sidebar when you're done with this podcast and you're craving more content, wherever you are in your journey with us. But there's a great audio. I listened to the audiobook. There's an actual book that was written that this guy wrote this huge series of essays that 1999 is the best year ever of movies. And he used box office to qualify a lot of this stuff. 99's good. Don't get me wrong. 99's a huge, there's some major movies, some stuff that really changed the industry. However, I think in our individual story, this gets exciting because this is the year that literally sets up so much crazy stuff. And it starts with the movie that
you're gonna say that. It was like we set it up, and then all of a sudden I go super obscure with our very first movie that no one's ever heard of.
I mean, I'll let you carry it away because I'll be honest with you guys. We have show notes, and Tony does a very great job at prepping the show notes. Like that's his half of the deal. He preps show notes. I do the technical. But I'm going to be honest with you. I had to do a little bit of homework because there's another obscure movie in this mix that is very special to he and I. But this one I didn't even remember. So tee it up, man. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I like to keep you on your toes. So when you actually do look at the show notes, you're like, what? Oh, I have to do something. I actually have to do some work today. So that's always kind of fun. Yeah, man. I mean, 1993 starts off, but it's like, you start off in January, so sometimes you get some some kind of obscure movies that kind of start that year. And when I was going to the Arnold School, one of the things that was so great about it is at this point, I'm starting my sophomore year, and I am. What's going to happen here is I set my own schedule, and I only go to school Mondays through Thursday, so I'm off on Friday, and so I dragged my mom on a Friday, January 22nd, to opening day to see the movie Hexed. And everyone's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And
Go ahead, please continue. I'm sorry.
so it's a funny movie. It's a comedy. It's a dark comedy, and it's got Ari Gross, Claudia Christian, and the great Norman Fell, who played Mr. Roper on Three's Company. And of course, it's mostly like TV actors that kind of are in this feature film that was in theaters. But like Ari Gross kind of made his bones on the show Ellen, and Claudia Christian was Babylon 5, and she's super beautiful. But mostly TV actors, and then of course Norman Fell being Mr. Roper on Three's Company. I mean, it's mostly a TV cast. Really funny movie. It's about a guy who works in a concierge, and he gets a date with a French model named Hexina, and they go out on this date, and she's got one big problem. She's a psychotic killer, and he's got to deal with all the hijinks of her like murdering people while they're on this date. It sounds crazy. It is a bit crazy. I love this movie, and I don't know if you remember it, Drew, but in the room, in the big dark bedroom of mine that had no windows, this was one of the posters that was hanging up.
Well, if I remember correctly, it's kind of a like, because Claudia Christian was I mean, she was she's hot. She's still a beautiful woman, but like at the time she was definitely like smoking. I mean, she was tall and built well and all that stuff. But did you have the one with it was the white poster? Is it that one where she's like kissing him or something? Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a white poster. It's like in this really, really hot like red dress. And yeah.
So let me tee up something real quick, because that's an interesting note. Like Tony's house. So we lived across the street from each other, as you guys know, listening to the show. We lived across the street from each other, and Tony's bedroom was. I don't think it was meant to be a bedroom. Technically, no. Probably not in the design of that house, right?
No. So when you go upstairs, as soon as you walked up the stairs, if you walked straight across, you walked straight down the stairs, through the hallway. That ran right into my bedroom. That was the normal bedroom. It had like a window, and it was like a normal bedroom.
A bathroom.
Yeah, bathroom.
Some doors.
That I split with my brother. Like my brother had it on the other side of that room. We split the bathroom, and we shared that.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it was like, hey, do you want to go back into the playroom? And do you want to make that your room? And it's like this like shotgun room that goes straight back. And it's huge. Yeah. It's a massive playroom. But the theory was that my brother had to get through my room in order to go back to the playroom. And so it was kind of like, okay, my brother's got to walk through his teenage brother's room to go back to his playroom to play with all his toys. And so my mom was like, you know what? Maybe you should switch it up. Go back into the playroom, then you can close the door when you don't want to be bothered, and then he can have the other room that leads into it, and that can be his playroom. And it turned out to be a better thing.
Yeah, and I'll tell you though, I mean, it's also as a teenager fantastic, because what's the one thing most teenagers want to do? Just sleep forever. They just want to sleep all the time. And the fact is, it had no windows. There's no recollection of what time it is when you're back in this room. And when I would often spend the night, Tony had one of those beds that the bottom, I forget what they're called, but it was a trunk bed or something. But is that what it is? A trunk bed? Is that right?
Yeah.
And the bottom would pull out, and I would sleep there, and Tony would sleep in his bed. And so like, that's how it. But I mean, I would get in trouble because eventually, not like serious, not like the first episode kind of trouble, but I would get in trouble because we would stay up late watching movies, playing video games, mostly Tecmo Bowl that I got my butt kicked in, and we would I would sleep till like noon or 1 o'clock. You wouldn't even know because it was so dark. You would just stay asleep. And I would, and this is pre cell phones, folks. I would get blown up. And I remember multiple times, I do remember your mom coming in there and waking me up and being like, hey, Drew, your mom wants you to come home.
Yeah.
And I'd walk outside and it'd be noon. It'd be like, what is going on?
Yeah.
It just was part of our childhood growing up. So it's important to set it up. So it's interesting that you bring up that poster being in there because it was very much, it was realistically though, it was almost like being in a little theater because you had your TV in there and all that stuff. So it was almost like having a theater. So
I
it
had
was
my
great.
computer. I mean, I had everything, and then I had tons of posters, just tons of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's hilariously
it was
stuff.
awesome. But that was a cool movie, and my mom enjoyed it too. And I don't think she's seen it since. But I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, getting to go on a Friday when you're supposed to be at school, but I don't have to go to school on Fridays, so I'm dragging my mom to see movies that nobody else wanted to see. So it was pretty fun.
What's also interesting about that Friday scenario, because I ended up, in my senior year, I ended up at Arnold School as well. But the interesting thing about that Friday scenario is when I went to college, I believe you were in the same scenario. When we went to University of South Alabama, they were on a Monday through Thursday schedule because they were on a quarter system. So you had Fridays off anyway. So it was like the adjustment of moving from daily school or weekday school. I was already prepped for it. So it was very easy for me to transition, which probably protected me from just being some wild hellion on Thursday nights like so many of the other kids were during college, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I have not seen that movie. I remember seeing it because I liked I don't know. I don't remember him from I don't remember Ari at all. I mean, I remember his face if I look at it, but I knew Claudia Christian because I was a big fan of I liked Babylon 5. I'm a big sci-fi nerd, which comes up later on in this episode. But I remember seeing that, but I don't remember the movie beyond that.
Yeah, I mean it's good. And Ari Gross was like he was doing movies around that time. I mean, he did like The Experts with John Travolta and stuff like that. But I mean, he would make most of his bones, and now he's mostly TV as well. Still pops up on a lot of shows that you know real popular as mostly like a guest star and stuff like that. But yeah, good actor. I mean, good film. A lot of fun. It's very funny, and you know we'll talk about it later as well.
Great, there you go. All right, so this is where it starts to happen. You guys are going to see in the 90s, especially 93. It's not but a week later that we're back in the movie theater. This is where we just really started getting into seeing movies. And real quick, before we preface this isn't a knock on any of these movies, but could you talk about, like, because some people may not realize this. I certainly didn't at this age when I was younger. But could you talk about like the release schedule? Because typically speaking, that January, February, March has got a different release schedule. Could you maybe tee that up a bit? Not that to say any of these movies are bad, but could you set that up? I always thought that was interesting.
It's changed a little bit now because there's not as many movies sometimes getting released. But I mean, but back in those days, they kind of January and February, they were kind of, especially January was kind of a soft month. You know, they would kind of release the stuff that was not necessarily bigger films because in a lot of places it's winter and there's snow and things of that nature. So, I mean, that year they released like Alive, which turned out to be a pretty decent sized film, and they released Nowhere to Run with Jean-Claude and stuff like that in 1993 at this time. But usually it's reserved for movies that studios think are kind of soft and are not going to get as big of a box office gross. And that's always been that was always the case, especially with January and early February. And then as we kind of go on, and they would release stuff that was pertinent to holidays and things like that. But that was kind of always the case. And then you know it's changed a little bit. So now they try to get like a bigger movie out in January every once in a while. But still to this day, it's still kind of the same. I mean they generally release softer movies in that month.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this is jumping ahead a little bit because it's not even in the 90s, I don't think, when it came out. But the movie Snatch comes out in that window of time, does it not?
It does.
Right,
it does
and that movie... Yeah,
it comes out in that time frame. And again, that was a movie that was kind of like a more foreign film, kind of an import, and you know, trying to see how much of a box office draw Guy Ritchie would be, you know, in an American audience. And of course, that one did well. Some of them do well. Like in 1983,
that's what I was teeing up.
Yeah, And 1993, Alive did really well. That was a big hit,
Right.
and so those types of movies do pretty well at times. And, you know, you can get audiences there. It does, like you said, and I think that's what your point was, is that you'll get a lot more eyeballs in some of these films because it's not, you're not going up against what's going to be coming out in 1983 like Jurassic Park. You know, you're not going up against something like that. That's a big summer
Yeah.
film.
Well, it's interesting because the next movie on our list, again, we said we saw Tony sees this on the 22nd. I don't know what I saw maybe in that window. We know my memory is not as strong, but on January 29th, we go see a movie that has spawned at least 4, if not more, iterations.
9.
I think there's nine.
It's
So the first one must have done
sequels.
Okay, so this movie spawns 9 sequels. So the first one must have done fairly well. I remember it. I'll never forget it. But the first one did well, and then they just went 9 deep later on. And that is the movie that we would affectionately call Snipper, which is Sniper, but we jokingly called it Snipper for a while. But is the movie Sniper, starring Tom Berringer and
Billy Zane.
Billy Zane, thank you. I was almost going to say Arnold Vosloo for some reason, but that's poor man's Billy Zane. No, it's actual Billy Zane in it.
Billy Zane and the late J.T. Walsh. And
That's right.
And yeah, this is Sniper, man, this is a great film. I mean, the original is just an absolute thriller action classic to me. Tom Berringer at his best. I mean, I love Tom Berringer in this era. But I mean, like, this film, this was it. I mean, we talked about this film all the time back in the day.
Well, it's because it was an interesting movie. Like, looking back, I've seen it maybe within the past 5 years, but looking back on it, it was a very stylized movie for an action film. So it wasn't just like a great action film. Like, I don't even know who directed this, but whoever directed it put in the effort to make it a little more intricate and unique. And we went to go see it with my dad. And I remember the hype to my dad was, my dad has always been a hunter. And so, you know, I mean, essentially in my mind as a kid, you're basically a sniper when you hunt deer, except my dad just sat in a tree stand. He didn't do a lot of blind hunting back then. But point being is, it was that kind of thing. So we convinced my dad to take us to this movie. And there's one gimmick in there in this film that, if I'm going to spoil it, but you should go see it. It's still great. But there's a spot where it's a sniper, counter sniper thing. It's really tense. It's very well made. And he like shoots the guy, but it goes through the scope and blows out the guy. I mean, it is so, and as a kid for us, that was the shot we were waiting for. This is pre-video game days. Yeah. This is pre all that stuff. Like, you didn't have anything like this. And it was so unique. And again, the texture and tone of that film was just super well made. It's a great movie. It's really, and it's a classic gunplay type movie, because it's not just like, I'm not knocking John Wick, but John Wick is like gunplay for gunplay's sake. This, when they fired a shot, because they were snipers or snippers, they were firing shots with purpose. So like, they build these action scenes up. So just talking about from a filmmaking standpoint, they build to these sequences in order to, they earn the shot, so to speak, both cinematically and in the storyline.
And they're dealing with like the Panama jungles and stuff like that. So there's all these different scenes to get us there, and they have to, and they're trying to find certain areas, and it's really kind of a sniper versus sniper film. So there's a lot of drama, and there's a lot of, you know, thrilling moments and a lot of edgy bits. And yeah, I mean, I remember being in the theater thinking, man, this movie is it. Like, this is the film. I had a poster of this one hanging in my room too, if you remember. But yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was a big one. It was one of our jams. I mean, we spent a lot of time making jokes about shooting through the eye. I mean, there was all that kind of stuff. Like, it was there for us. And I think for me, I remember that being, I had not had a lot of exposure to, because Tom Berringer at the time was making, when I say adult, I don't mean pornography, obviously, but he was making more adult centric films. I mean, he's a very competent actor. So this was my first exposure to him and Billy Zane for the most part that I can remember. And so like, both those guys were like, hey, these dudes are cool. You know, it was like that kind of vibe in teeing it up to it. So I do remember my dad seeing it, and that was the pull, was to get him to go see this movie. At this point, for me, the rated R barrier had been broken previous year. Well, Terminator 2, but then previous to that was, or after that, shortly after that was Lethal Weapon 3, which will be important later. But I saw that with my mom at Dolphin Street. I do remember that very explicitly. But like those bits, it was big time. So now it was like, now we can go see movies with my parents. And I think my parents were probably relieved. Although in the next episode, you'll understand why my dad regretted the fact that he allowed me to see rated R movies when we drug him to see in his opinion, one of the worst movies ever made. And it's actually one of my favorite films. Anyway, back on topic. So we go see that film, and it obviously is a big deal for us. But in the meantime of this happening, let me set something else up. Magazines were the only way you got information communicated back in the day. The internet was maybe barely around, but you didn't get a lot of movie topics. So for those that remember, right. And so one of the magazines I would occasionally pick up, it was mildly contraband because there was some weird stuff in them, but I would pick up Starlog from time to time, which is a science fiction magazine. Tony remembers already. And in this magazine, there were behind the scenes stills, and it was a whole big write-up on this movie starring a guy who I never got his name right. I always call him Oliver Gruner, and you remember that.
Yep.
And I was obsessed with him because I thought this was going to be the next big. I mean, the way that article was written, the PR worked well on me. I thought he was going to be the biggest movie star, the biggest action star ever, right? And I even remember there's notes inside of there that Oliver Gruner has only like 3% body fat, and he's just how I remember that, I don't know, but I do. And I mean, the pictures in there were these crazy guns and robot stuff, and I mean, it was over the top science fiction. And that movie is called Nemesis.
Oh yeah, man. And it's amazing. It's amazing. Here's the thing. Like, I remember this movie, and it came out in theaters January 29th. Okay. But you and I did not see this movie in theaters. I mean, we were like hanging out, looking at these magazines, seeing these weird ads for this movie, and we're like, we got to see this film. And I just remember us talking about it so much that by the time it comes out on VHS in like late July of that year, and we're jumping a little. We do mostly chronological here, but because this movie came out in January of 1993, we're doing it. We're going to talk about us seeing it at my house, and
right.
But it was just, the movie's really good, and it spawns 4 sequels. I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. But
listen, I've seen them all. I've seen all of them, man. I actually have a shirt at home. I reviewed this movie on another podcast I was on, called The Catacombs, and all we did was go find obscure, pardon the expression, but B movies, although this had more of an A prestige because of the theatrical release. And this sets up another segment here, or another tangent for a second, but we would review those movies. So we re-reviewed this, and I have this great shirt that has, like, the fourth Nemesis is just a weird. I mean, it barely makes sense. It's a weird movie. But what was great about this time frame is these movies were effectively being made and sold. We've talked about this a little bit before, based on movie posters, and it 100% worked on you and me, because that movie poster, he has a trench coat, he has these cool round glasses. It was for us, it was like, this is it. This is the next big thing.
And it's kind of like, it's like this cyberpunk movie. I mean, for people who don't know what the heck it is, it's a cyberpunk movie, and it's about this group of rogue cyborgs that want, because his character is basically like a part cyborg, part human, and these cyborgs want to take over human beings and wipe out humanity. And so he has to, and they've like killed his partner, and so he's got to go after them, and this whole bit. And I mean, yeah, it's kind of a cliched plot, but set in a different world. And you got to remember, this is 1993. It's not 2024. It's 1993. So you hadn't seen it as much back then as you do now, of course. But I mean, the movie's it's really kind of a sleek thriller. And even though we're joking about it, kind of being like, oh yeah, the poster definitely worked on us. Yeah, it did, but I thought we went away from this movie after watching it at the house going, it's pretty damn good, you know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we were very much into it. I will say, recently released, there's a Jennifer Lopez movie that just came out called Atlas, and not the same story, but very familiar vein of Nemesis. I mean, it's very similar in some ways, and not an update by any means, and definitely not a remake, but interesting in the same genre that it's come back around, just like we've talked about before on the show. Like sometimes these genres come back, and cyborgs and all that stuff was so popular because you had well, not really success, but Blade Runner had a cult status. You had the movie Cyborg that I think came before this, did it not? Yeah.
Yep.
And so that sort of cyberpunk realm in the 90s was like technology and computers and all this stuff. The Borg are on Star Trek. It's all starting to become part of popular culture, and so they were cashing in on that genre bump with the movie Nemesis. Oliver Grunier.
And he wasn't in any of the other ones, by the way.
That's the worst part. That's what makes it so bad.
Whereas Tom Berringer is in a lot of the other sniper movies. He's not in any of these Nemesis films at all. So it's kind of like, okay, who are all these people and what are they doing in this movie? And some of them don't make any sense as far as relating to this, source material whatsoever, and they're kind of odd. But yeah, I mean, it's this film itself very good, and I actually really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Like I said, I reviewed it. And it's been a minute, and it is part of those kind of movies were very influential on me because I didn't realize it at the time. They're technically not a genre. They're technically indie films because a lot of these were independently financed.
Yeah.
So they weren't coming from studios. So they were scrappy, and there's a lot of scrappy mechanics in these movies that made it work. So when one of them works, it really works well, and it comes out. That said, though, one of the films that comes out that year, and this not far from this, not in July, of course, we're back in January here, but just after that, we go back to the theater, and if I assume this is the same one, but it is The Vanishing. Is that correct? It's The Vanishing with Nancy Travis in it.
Yeah, February 5th, The Vanishing comes out. So we're just outside of January, but February 5th, yeah. The Vanishing comes out. I was all in on this movie. I mean, literally all in on this film.
Is it Jeff? Is it Jeff? Not Jeff Bridges. Who is it? It's
Bridges, Kiefer Sutherland.
It is Jeff Bridges.
Who I love. Jeff Bridges, Kiefer Sutherland, Nancy Travis, and Sandra Bullock is in this film. And Nancy's got a bigger role than Sandra Bullock because this is pre-Speed. So
right,
she's not as big as she's gonna be later on down the road. Yeah, so I mean, it's a remake but it's remade by the same director. So the Dutch director George Sleezer, made this movie in 1988, and then he did the 1993 remake as well for the American audiences.
It's French, Dutch. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, got it.
And he is and what happened is, I mean, if you see the original movie, the ending to the original is about as shocking as an ending as you could ever see in a film. But this
spoil it. I've never seen it. Spoil it. What's the ending of the original? Yeah, I've seriously never seen it.
Yeah, it's just a crazy death scene, and it's So yeah, I mean, it's really cool though. I mean, I'd rather people get to see it and just go check it out. And but it is a death scene because eventually these two guys, because there's a killer that's kidnapping women, and in the American version it's played by Jeff Bridges, and then there's a guy who has his girlfriend taken, and the girlfriend's played by Sandra Bullock, and the guy is Kiefer Sutherland, and she just literally vanishes. They go to a gas station, and she just disappears completely. And he has no idea where she is. He has no idea where she's gone. And he has to piece it all together. And during that time frame, he will, meet Nancy Travis's character. And they try to figure out and solve the mystery together, and in order to do that, he's going to have to kind of live out what happened to her, to his, to be able to understand the killer. He'll have to try to live out what happened to Sandra Bullock, and it's a sleek movie, really smart thriller, and it was a movie that I also saw this on opening day as well, and just absolutely loved it. This is one of those movies that I'm going to see it in February, and you didn't actually go with me to see it. You've seen it, obviously, but I'm going to see it in February. There's going to be another movie that we're going to get to in late July. That comes out in late July of this year that has Nancy Travis in it, and then I'm going to come back because we hang out at Movie Gallery so much. I will end up getting the poster for The Vanishing. I'll end up getting the big cardboard stand-up for this movie that also resided in my room, and I still have it, by the way.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And this is going to do that because it's Nancy Travis is on the poster and the stand-up, and we'll get into all that later. But yeah, I had all the stuff from The Vanishing as well. It's a good movie.
So interesting thing about this, just in case you guys don't remember, we've talked about it before on the show, but just as a quick reminder, in this, if you're maybe younger or have forgotten or didn't know this at all, when back in the day, pre this day of date release stuff that we have nowadays, back in the day, like when a movie came out in theaters, you waited 6 months to a year, sometimes a little bit longer on a few films, in order for them to come out in VHS. And you couldn't buy movies back then. You could buy it on VHS, but they charged like $100. So the video rental store was crucial. And Tony and I hung out at a video rental store not far from our house. Very important. There's a lot of things that happen in that I mean, once we get into that a little bit more, we'll tee it up some. But this movie gallery hangout, I mean, we literally hung out in a video store. I mean, that's what we did. That was our place to go hang out. And then Wendy worked there, which I'll talk about that one day, but whole thing. And so the crazy part about this movie for me is that, granted, I didn't see it in the same window, but the impact it had, I do know this. At the time of watching films, I'd seen a lot of movies. I'd seen, a lot of different stuff, but this movie specifically, The Vanishing, is the movie that made me understand what a thriller actually is. And it becomes very important to my life in the sense of, as a filmmaker, I would go back to the George Schlesy, what an unfortunate last name. But I would go back to that movie as being, for me, it was always an internal source to cite different things. And so in college, the first film I wrote was and Tony helped me with, was a thriller that had a very similar sort of, it was a slow burn type scenario where there's tense moments, and it's because of The Vanishing. So The Vanishing becomes a very pivotal film for me because of the way it's constructed is in such a way that it builds upon, builds upon the geography of how a thriller is supposed to work, like how it's supposed to be laid out, where you're taking the character on the journey, and it sets it up very well. So again, The Vanishing, one of those movies, when I look back on it, I think it's a great movie. I think it holds up. It's one of those films that holds up so well because it does a very good job of removing technology from the situation, because we didn't have a bunch back then, but it removes the technology and forces you into this really great environment. Great movie, worth seeing if you've never seen it. And you get great, Jeff Bridges' performance in that is, he made that villain so interesting. And it's that's the other part about it for me, is that just his take on that villain is just so good. It's so good. And a lot of times it's Kiefer that's gone more villainous than Jeff, but Jeff was killer as the villain.
Yeah. He's great. Not only is he awesome in this, and he's working that accent and everything else, but I mean, you got him in this, and there's some great one-liners in this as well, just like there is in Sniper. I mean, there's some great one-liners in both those films, and and saw all these movies, and going in, we've seen Hexed and Sniper, and here and this movie, all at Carmike 10 in Westmobile. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, it's such a sleek thriller, and when I watch this movie, one of the cool things about it is Kiefer Sutherland. His line is like, he's having this like breakdown moment with Nancy Travis where he's was just completely breaking down mentally. And he's just like, I could go on with my life if I just knew where the hell she was or what the hell happened. He goes, I have no idea what's going on. If I knew anything, I could go on, but I can't. And it was so profound. It was just like, it's not knowing. It's not knowing. And I took that with me in life. Like I was like,
Yeah.
it's not knowing information that drives me insane, you know, and it does in this movie, and it I love that scene, and it's such a pivotal scene in this film, but yeah, I mean it's a cool line as well.
That's great. It's funny. I mean, that's your job as a assistant director is information. So it seems only fitting that
Right.
it falls into that line. So one of the things that is interesting about Carmike that we've kind of set up where things were geographically, but there's this place at the time, it's vastly different now. But the place to get there, because again, we're out in West Mobile. West Mobile, this area of town is not as developed. Mobile's not big enough city for those who don't live here or from here. Mobile's not a big enough city to have traditional suburbs, but this was the equivalent of that, right? We were just outside of the city. And on the way there and all that, you're driving by like you're not far from Mims Park where baseball was king. Like that's on that side of town. There was a hospital there that we drove by every day, which becomes very important for me and Tony later down the road in terms of our filmmaking careers. Some of our friends lived on that side of town. So it was like that little area was very intricate. What do you remember about that area? What's your takeaway from it?
So it's kind of cool, right? Because I mean, like this theater is way different than any of the other theaters, because all the other theaters are more in like the midtown area. Like we've gone over some of, you know, Airport Boulevard, Midtown, Dolphin Street, all that area. It's like that's where theaters kind of resided in Mobile, and then this
Right.
one gets built in late 1991. And it's just a very different feel. And I did kind of want to go over it geographically a little bit, because we're going to spend so much time driving this area in some of our stories that I kind of wanted to set
Oh
it
yeah.
up. I mean, you know, Drew and I, you and I, we lived on a cul-de-sac, and the cool thing about it is like it's obviously one way in, one way out, and as soon as you drive up to the top of this street, you take a right turn. You take the right turn, and you go down probably about a mile, a little bit more than a mile, and then you take a left right at what at the time was a Circle K. I don't know
It's
what
still
it is.
there. That's
Okay.
still no, it's still there. Still
I
there.
don't know if
Yep.
it was
Yep.
still
Yep.
called a Circle K, but it was. But at the time, it was a Circle K, and we'll have a lot more stories about that in the future as well. But then you take a left right there, and then you take that down, and you go down
That's Gerby Road. That's called Gerby Road. You take a left
Gerby
on the
Road.
Gerby
Yeah,
Road. Yep.
Gerby Road. Take a left on Gerby Road. You take that all the way down, and like you said, you pass this hospital, and which I don't actually know the name of it now. It's had different names, and I know went
It's
away.
gone.
It's gone now. Oh, it's completely gone now.
It's completely gone. There's nothing left.
Oh wow. Okay, well that's there you go. And
I know.
past that, you take that, and like I said, you take that entire road about another mile and a half, somewhere in that range, and then you end up at what at the time, and it's obviously changed. At the time, was a junior station.
It's still there.
It's still the gas station is there, but I know the names have changed. I know it. I know
I
this one.
think it might. I think it might. The Circle K is still there. I drive by that sometimes. I will look next time. I think it might actually still be a junior. I swear it might be the only one in the city. I swear to you. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So anyway, on the right side is this what it was or is or whatever it could be, a junior station, and you basically glide across the street. You don't really take a hard right. You take like a slight right onto the road here, and what is that? Which one was that one? That's
I don't remember what that's called. I don't think it's called Gerby anymore. I don't think it was Gerby. I don't remember the name of that road. I can look it up when I get over there.
and then you take that. You basically just take a slight right at this gas station, and then you immediately take a left, and right down that road, you're gonna on the left side. You're gonna pass all this residential area, which is like that's gonna be where a bunch of our friends are, like the Jeff Worleys and the Andy Olivers and all those guys, and then
Oh yeah.
On the right side of it is a apartment complex that you pass, and that's where Paul Bearer used to live.
What?
The Undertaker's manager, who's from Mobile,
In
Alabama.
Sandpiper. It's called Sandpiper Apartments. It's right
Sandpiper,
there.
right? Sandpiper Apartments, where Paul Bearer, the Undertaker's
Crazy.
manager, WWE, WWF, where his manager used to live. I don't know for how long, but he did live there at one point. But yeah, you pass that, and then immediately as soon as you pass that, you are now in this little area where you can take the right turn into Carmike Theater. And when you take the turn into Carmike Theater, you're immediately on the side of the theater. If you're looking straight at the theater, you'd be on the right side of the theater. And so you're on the
Right.
side of the theater, so then you could either go to the back of the theater, which is taking a right, or you could go to the front of the theater, which is where the bigger parking lot was, and then that was, where the front was, and you had to, where the ticket kiosks and all that was, and the huge parking lot. And so, there's parking on the side, there's parking in the back, and there's parking in the front. And then, of course, just beyond that, just the very next little turn was the Mount Asia turn, which
That's
was
correct. Which was a mini golf course.
was for the mini golf course and the gaming center. And then on the left side of that street was a Dairy Queen.
That's correct.
That is now that you told me it's now been long gone. I knew that had been gone for a very long time.
But it's become an infamous bar in the city called Patch's Lounge, which is not safe for anyone. Patch's is it's not even a dive bar. Whatever's below a dive bar is Patch's. That's what it is.
Right.
It's pretty rough.
Crazy.
It would also at one point it would become an Italian restaurant in which I worked, and it was an Italian restaurant run by the whitest man I've ever met.
But the funny thing about you talking about that bar being there is that's also where the DMV was in that like shopping mall area. That's where
100%.
the DMV
Still there. It's still there.
I love it. So that's great. That's great that the DMV is right there with a seedy bar. That's kind of funny. Yeah,
it's perfect.
But that's kind of the geography of how to get to that theater. And I drove it a billion times, and we'll talk about that later on as well. But yeah, I wanted to kind of set that up because we're gonna drive it, like I said, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and it was pretty cool. I just remember all those places.
Oh yeah, no, it's right along there for sure, and it is it's kind of wild. It's very central because as we expand our friend group in high school and all that stuff, that area is very prominent. As we said, Jeff Worley's house, we used to hang out in his driveway, and then across the street lived this guy named Andy Oliver, and so like that whole area Mark Rogers didn't live far, Jonathan Green, all these guys that we grew up with all lived in that area, and weirdly, you could get to almost all of their houses by barely touching roads. So you would just navigate through all these neighborhoods, and we knew all these like paths through these neighborhoods to get from one side to the other to the movie theater and back. Had we been kids on bikes, we would have never hardly touched a main road. And so it's like I said, it's not a suburb, but it was like a suburb area.
Right.
Very good spot.
Yeah, very residential.
Yeah, so that it's extremely residential. Now it's a little more grown up. In fact, there's a Chevron station that probably wasn't there back then, but would later become there. I couldn't get dropped off at the movie theater, but I actually went on tour in 96, 97 with the Bloodhound Gang during the Firewater Burn. If you guys know that whole song, I'm not going to say the lyrics because it'll get us a parental advisory rating. But I got dropped off at that Chevron because it was close enough. It was the easiest place for the bus to pull over and drop me off. It was the weirdest. And it's because I knew that Jeff Worley lived close and he could come get me. A whole crazy thing.
Yeah.
So that whole area, very important to our scenario, not just from the theater, but like just in general. So we travel that a good bit. And you mentioned the Dairy Queen. because my dad is very much a creature of habit, and one of his habits is that he must have. And I unfortunately have this habit now, and I work very hard to try not to overdo it. But he loved to have dessert. Dessert was his jam. And that guy, he loved nothing more than Dairy. He really loved Blizzards, but he loved nothing more than Dairy Queen ice cream. And that Dairy Queen being close to a movie theater often meant that Tony and I got bonus treats before we went to the movie theater.
Oh yes, yeah. I remember this quite well. I mean, we decided to go to see a movie, and we'll set it up here in a second. But we decided to go see a movie, and we both went and ate dinner at our own residences. Of course, we were right across the street from each other, and then we got into your dad's truck and went, and he was like, "Let's go get some ice cream."
Yep. See, told you he can't even stop himself. He
And
couldn't
so
stop
that's what
himself.
we did. We went and got ice cream at the Dairy Queen, and then
Yep.
sat in the truck eating the ice cream together. It was pretty funny.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that would lead us to, so my dad is a very interesting character. We've talked about Tony's dad a little bit. My dad is very interesting. So my dad likes very specific type movies, much like Tony's father. And my dad loves slapstick comedy. So he has always been a fan of Airplane. He enjoyed the Hot Shots movies. He loves those he loves the Zucker type movies. He loved them. And so and I loved Lethal Weapon. That Lethal Weapon 3 was I saw that with my mom. I'll always remember, but I loved that movie. I loved it so much. It was, and the third one more than the others. I don't know why, but I just loved Lethal Weapon 3. Maybe because I spent that time with my mom. That's probably the real value of it, is the memory of her going with me.
It's a good movie, though.
Because it's a great movie, but my mom does not like action tense movies at all. So the fact that she took me to see that was a big deal. So this comedy's coming out starring Emilio Estevez and Samuel L. Jackson.
Right?
And it is a parody of the Lethal Weapon movies. And this is before Scary Movie and all that stuff. Like, this movie was ahead of it. And it's a National Lampoons, if I'm not mistaken, too.
It is.
Correct?
National Lampoons. Yep.
It falls into a little bit of that Zucker category for me, because some National Lampoons are not quite as slapstick as this one was, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to go see this, and we're going to go see Loaded Weapon 1, which is still to this day one of the funniest movies ever made to me. I enjoy every second of it, especially as a Lethal Weapon fan. I'm a fan of that series, but this movie it should be part of the series. If you watch all 700 of the Lethal Weapons, you should also watch the one Loaded Weapon.
It's great. I mean, it's called Loaded Weapon 1. It did well at the box office. It's like an $8 million movie that made like $51 million worldwide, but it didn't quite make enough that they were like, well, let's launch a huge franchise. They didn't launch a big franchise for this one. So it's this odd movie that's called Loaded Weapon 1, which is kind of the beauty of it. They only made one of them. And yeah, like you said, it's got Samuel L. Jackson, Emilio Estevez, John Lovitz, Tim Curry, Kathy Ireland. I mean, it's a really cool cast, and I mean, we had a lot of fun watching this movie after eating some ice cream with your pops, and it was, yeah, I mean, it's still to this day is a great movie. I own it in my collection with a lot of these other films, but I have this one specifically. And
did you have a poster for this one? Did you have a poster for this one?
I did not have this poster. I think maybe your cousin did.
Okay, got it.
I think one of the ones that he ended up with. I did not actually end up with a poster for this.
Okay. I just was wondering, because like I remember the box art, and I remember the poster very well, and I remember it being, we all loved that movie. Like, it was a big jam for us. So it was a big bit down the road. I did it not even long ago to my brother Jeff. I still quote lines from this movie all the time. Like, wilderness girls. I mean, dude, Tim Curry. I mean, how awesome is it when John Lovitz goes through the door, looks through the peephole, because there's been a knock on his door, a doorbell, and then he looks through and he sees Tim Curry dressed up as a wilderness Girl Scout, and he's got his beard and everything else. I mean, everybody who's watching is like, it's a guy. But he opens up the door anyway.
It's pretty special, man. And I worked with a couple of the guys from this because I worked with Tim Curry, I worked with Emilio Estevez, and they're awesome. They're amazing guys. A lot of fun to deal with, and but this movie is just like you said. It's slapstick. It's fun. It's got a lot of funny one-liners in it. It's got a lot of humor. If you love Lethal Weapon, this is a great slapstick film for you.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. I recently was watching Hot Shots, and my youngest daughter Pearl came in. She's 8, and she came in and she was like, "What are you watching?" I was like, "Hot Shots. Why don't you sit down and watch it with me?" Because I was like, "Let's see how this goes." And we're watching the movie, and Pearl goes, she watches it for a while, and I'm laughing. I mean, it's funny as all get out to me. I mean, it's again in the same vein as Loaded Weapon. And Pearl's like, this is like someone made a movie for adults, but tried to also make a movie for kids. And I was like, that's slapstick. That is the perfect description. That's what Loaded Weapon is. It is interesting, though, that more action parodies, they didn't seem to do like real great, right? Because I would also, 50 million is not a bad number, especially in that timeline. But like even like the next one that comes to mind is like Last Action Hero.
Right.
Also kind of in that parody space to some extent. Much better story in terms of like
much
cohesion.
Bigger budget too.
Right. And same kind of vibe. Now I go back and watch it, and it's a great movie. But at the time, like not me, I didn't care. We saw it. I remember seeing that one. But
yeah,
it wasn't a big blow up type movie. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point. But it's just an interesting thing that that action movie parody has never really been able to break through as well as like, Hot Shots did it, but some of the other ones haven't. So.
You got Naked Gun with all its movies, and then it's like, and yeah, I mean, it was cool. I mean, it was, but yeah, it didn't quite break through as big as some of those other movies, but it did well, but just not, quite well enough to launch, the four Nemesis films or the 9 extra sniper films.
It's definitely the jam. 1 week later, though, will come one of the lines that I think anybody listening to this podcast has probably in their lifetime said it, which is just it's huge. But everybody, I know so many people that quote this movie every, what day is that? This February 2nd, every February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Of course, the movie's Groundhog Day. At least me, and in my household, there's always a Ned Ryerson reference. There's always some reference. Ned Ryerson? I mean, it just happens all the time. And Stephen Tobolowsky, we did get to work with him.
Yep, we
did get to work with him.
We got to
Love Liza, and he was in
Love Liza. We also got to work with Michael Shannon, who's in this movie.
That's correct.
He plays Fred, who's part of the couple that gets the WrestleMania tickets from Phil.
Right.
And you and I did a movie called Dead Birds with him.
Yep.
And I had him tell me every story that he could tell me from this set, because him and I talked a lot at base camp, because I was the base camp assistant director on that movie.
Tee up what that is, though. What is base camp, and so people understand it.
Base camp is where all the cast trailers are, hair and makeup, costumes. All the cast trailers where they go to sit around and change their clothes and stuff like that, and all that's kind of situated nestled into one area, so that we're all together, and so that the security can kind of keep an eye on everything as one. But we call that base camp, so that and that's kind of where there's usually at least one assistant director, maybe one PA or something like that in there as well, plus costumers and hair and makeup and like I said, all the cast is in there. There's some food usually in there, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep. And so you're getting to hang out with Michael Shannon, which, I mean, listen, that dude is wildly brilliant. I mean, wildly brilliant. And
nicest man there is.
What's that?
He is the nicest man there is.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's one of my favorite memories from Dead Birds. But so you what did he tell you about this? I mean, he's on set with Bill Murray, and this is Bill Murray. This is primo Bill Murray time. This is like peak Bill Murray era.
This is a huge movie. I mean, I saw this movie with my buddy Richard, and we went with another friend of ours, Matt Stevens. We saw this at Springdale 6, which is inside the Springdale Mall. And I remember we parked on the back side of it.
Yep, that was the
But
trick. That's where you would go.
instead of going on the front, we parked on the back side, which is
Yep.
we were coming from Richard's house, and so we went and saw this film, and I just remember watching it, thinking I'm going to set up the Michael Shannon bit, but I just remember watching it, and as I'm watching it, thinking this is an instant classic. Like, we're watching an instant classic. You're not always think that when you're watching a movie. Sometimes you're just like in the moment thinking, man, this is a good movie, but this is one of those that I was able to pick out right away and say, this is an instant classic. We're going to be talking about this movie for decades. It was that profound. Like, it was that funny. And we knew the guys were all big at the time. Bill Murray, Harold Ramis. I mean, all these guys were huge. Andy McDowell. And they were all big in the era. And it was just, that movie to me stood out as one of the all-time big comedies as I was watching it in theaters with these two guys. And I just loved every second of it. And I had to ask Michael Shannon about this film because I knew, being in the film industry and stuff like that, I knew that the stories were that Bill Murray and Harold Ramis never got along on this set, and that this is what the movie that broke up their friendship and partnership. And so I knew all that, and I had to ask Mike about it. Like, Mike, there was so much strife going on in the set. Like, how did you enjoy being there? And he was like, oh, it was the first movie I ever did. And he said, I absolutely had the greatest time of all time. He's like, Harold was great. Bill was great to me. He goes, everyone was awesome. And it's funny because I still think about that to this day, whereas film sets, as small as they might seem, also can be kind of large in the sense that a person might be having the greatest time of their life, and then, 10 feet over, a guy might be having the worst day of his life. It's really bizarre how
it's right.
When you put so many people into one area, the different viewpoints that come out of it really are quite extreme.
No, you're spot on. I mean, in some ways, we talk about it like a film set is when you're on set like that, it's very much ultra intimate and ultra distant at the exact same time, because in some cases the rest of the world's going around you, but you're so focused on your small little task in some cases that's all you can see. So you have this weird dichotomy that way. And then at the same time on the set, there's so many people. It's like being in high school is a lot of times what we reference it back to. There's so many people doing so many different things that have so many little moments, but yet you're so intimately close. You never know what's happening. It's a wild experience. That is certainly, there's very little. I imagine maybe if you've served in the military or something like that, where you're compact together in a unit and you have this group of people or a platoon, whatever it is. But it's the same kind of vibe. You're just constantly seeing the same people, and there's hierarchy and there's rank and there's ego and there's challenge. And it's interesting that on that film, which you would never pick up the tension between them in that movie because it is just a classic. You never see it.
It's a classic, and I mean, it's so funny because like the whole premise of the movie is that Phil Connors, played by Bill Murray, has to figure out this perfect day. Like, he's not getting it right, so he has to relive it over and over and over until he gets it right. And while that's going on, while that's the premise of this movie, Harold Ramis and Bill Murray are not getting their days right. It's like
right.
They're constantly fighting, they're constantly bickering. And I always found that to be really odd that it was on this movie that's where that happened. It's like this movie where they're supposed to. I know, like, Bill Murray was going through a divorce and things like that. There's a lot going on, but I mean, it's still that it's very sad because I love both those guys, and it's sad that we never got another movie after this, and they never even spoke until Harold was really sick and couldn't even talk. So yeah, it was kind of sad.
It is a beautiful thing. It's one of the reasons why, jumping forward to the future here a bit, or not future, but that future is, it's one of the reasons why I did very much enjoy the newer Ghostbusters, especially the fact that they paid a nice homage to Harold, and there's a nice little moment there that's like, if you're a fan, that not just of Ghostbusters, but of those guys, like, there's a nice little moment there that is a kind reminder that it's never too late. It's never too late to make that shift. So it's just one of those really good things of like bitterness can be a nasty thing, but if you figure out how to let it go at some point, it's a much better scenario. So great movie. I assume you've seen it. Everybody listening to this podcast, if you have not seen this movie, my Lord, yeah.
That's a massive movie. I mean, we've talked about some obscure films here, but I mean, a couple obscure ones, a couple bigger ones, but I mean, yeah, this is a classic. I mean, this is like a top 200 film on most boards.
100%. 100% with you. Forever a cinema classic. All right. In the sake of keeping to our structure here, we are rounding out. We have made it through our episode here. Now it is time for the world famous, the one and only Tony's picks of the week. Take it away, T.
Yeah, I got two of them this week. I like to try. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say Groundhog Day, as great as the movie is, because I'm assuming most people have already seen that one. So, I mean, I'm going to say Hexed, which I think is a movie that everyone's going to be like, what? But, I mean, check it out. If you get a chance to watch this, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's a screwball comedy, very dark in spots, very funny, and I think you'll dig it. And then, Drew and I were talking about it being sold as by a poster and stuff, but I think Nemesis is really, really, really something people should check out. Definitely the first one for sure. I think that is a good movie. It's very sleek, stylized thriller. It may not hold up with the CG as much as like if you're the type of person that wants to see 2024 CG and stuff like that, but a good movie, cool plot, and I think Nemesis and Hexed are the picks of the week. Two movies you should check out this weekend.
There you go. There it is. The world famous picks of the week. I've been following along. I have found a way, or I found Article 99 to watch, and then Stay Tuned. That's the last week's picks. Right. Stay Tuned I actually rewatched, and it holds up and is such a fun movie. I really enjoy it. So again, picks of the week, Hexed and Nemesis. You can find those. I don't know where you can find all these because sometimes we do find some obscure films like these. So good luck. I think Nemesis was on. I think Nemesis was on Amazon Prime for a period. I don't know where it is now. Hexed, I have no idea. But I like I said, I reviewed Nemesis not too long ago. Okay, so if you're listening and you would like to help us out, as we mentioned in the beginning, we love a review. It always helps us out. But you can also just give us some feedback. Tell us what you want more of, what you want to hear. Tell us how the show's going for you. Or if you have your own great memories, that's one thing that we don't want to shortfall. If you have a great memory, you can always send us an email to backforyourfuturepodcast@gmail.com. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, back.
There you go.
Oh, yep.
And that's written out. You can also follow us on X, Twitter, whatever it's called, which is back the number 4 for our future. So back for our future is on Twitter, and you can also find us on Facebook, which is Back for Our Future Podcast, also on Facebook. So if you have a great idea, memory, or something you want to share with us, feel free to hit it up. In the meantime, we try and post stuff on our social media. Tony does a great job of posting clips or other little bits that we come across, just fun bits. We recently, and very excitingly fun, we talked about the helmet poster. We got the helmet poster posted onto the page, and then the band Helmet liked it because they saw it.
I saw that. I loved it.
So it's good stuff. So if you're not hanging out on the Facebook page, there's lots of stuff to happen there. So we would love to have you come hang out with us and just give us your thoughts. We're here for it. And as always, Tony, you got any last words?
No, that's it. Just have a safe weekend, and thank you for listening.
And thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.